All right, so we have the second non-fish related talk of the day here at Reef Fest. So thank you so much for coming, and I wish you were all a little bit braver and would sit in the front row, but you know, I guess we'll take what you get. I am really, really scary, I know, look at me. All right, so we'll start this out with a real email I just received when I was researching and preparing for this talk. It is simultaneously flattering and disappointing to me because it shows how the public still perceives cave diving. So here we go. Hello, I am a senior in high school, and as part of our curriculum, we complete a senior capstone in which we research a topic of our choice in order to write a research paper and give a presentation on the subject. Our research will include finding and analyzing reliable, quality written sources, but another aspect is to complete active research. This involves contacting professionals, thank you, flattering, in the field to interview. For my research project, I am planning to research the psychology behind thrill-seeking activities, specifically scuba and cave diving. Ooh. All right, so this person clearly has a much higher opinion of me than I have of myself. I am absolutely not a thrill seeker, and I am not even very brave. I'm scared of heights, I'm scared of needles, I'm not that strong, and after years of small business ownership, I try to avoid adrenaline at all costs. When I'm not in the jungle cave diving, I like soft furnishings. I like snuggling with my dog Sausage, there she is, cooking really big meals, and sleeping 12 hours a night. I do have one trait, which I imagine I share with many of you here today, which is that I'm very, very curious, sometimes to a fault. And that, combined with a stubborn streak a mile wide and a total disregard for social norms, has led me to a life that I'm very grateful for. So I get to do this. For the last 20 years, Mexico's caves and caverns have been my office and my classroom. I own a cave diving center near Tulum, Mexico, called Under the Jungle. I teach people to be cave divers. I teach people to be cave diving instructors. I guide cave divers, I take photos and videos of cave diving. All the photos you will see here tonight are mine. I help out with science, I explore and map new caves, and sometimes I even get to travel around and talk about it to people. I've been traveling a fair amount recently and meeting people outside of my normal circles, like on airplanes and so forth, and all of you, right? And every time I meet a new person, they eventually ask me what I do for a living, and I say I'm a professional cave diver, and sometimes this gets met with a blank stare and a bless your heart before the person changes the subject, and sometimes I get a barrage of questions. Are you scared? No, of course not, otherwise I wouldn't do it. How deep do you go? Actually, most of Mexico's caves and caverns max out at recreational depths, but with a few exceptions. However, they are very, very long. We now have thousands of kilometers of interconnected tunnels in Mexico. And there's always the invariable question, what do you see, lots of fish? No. Not really. There's not really any fish. I know that when people think of scuba diving, they think of thriving reefs and swarms of tropical fish. There's really one fish in the cave. And there's more than one of them, but we don't see schools of them, and we don't see them on every dive. So why then do I do this? Well, I get to go to places like this whenever I want, and I get to see incredible formations like this. These are some of the things I see, but it's not what I see so much. It's how I feel when I see these things. And I think it comes down to the following concept that I discovered through Google AI and Wikipedia while I was making this talk. It is called the overview effect. The overview effect is a cognitive shift reported by some astronauts while viewing the Earth from space. Researchers have characterized the effect as a state of awe with self-transcendent qualities precipitated by a particularly striking visual experience. Frank White coined the term after interviewing astronauts. The overview effect is beyond words, requiring experience to understand. As one of my cave mentors once said, you don't know if you don't go. Right? It's been likened to Zen Buddhism. And Yadin Broadley et al. Mentions the effect can happen outside of space, stating that the overview effect triggers awe through both perceptual vastness, like seeing the Grand Canyon, and conceptual vastness, like contemplating big ideas like infinity. And if you want to see something vast, here's a place that we explored last year. So how could you look at a cave diver gliding gently through one of her projects and think that, oh, this is all about adrenaline? For me, the closest analog to cave diving is going on a difficult hike in the beautiful mountains. Maybe sometimes you see animals, but you're really there to see the structure, to stand in awe of the beauty of nature and the vastness of the planet, and to allow it to let you make you feel small. To get to the point that you can climb a challenging mountain, you need to train. You need to be physically and mentally prepared. Maybe you need gear, you need ropes, special shoes. Cave diving in some ways is the same. You need training and swimming technique and equipment. Of course, the analogy breaks down a little bit when you realize we float through the caves and our entire goal as cave divers is to move as little as humanly possible, make zero exertion, but you get the idea. When I am swimming through these places, I imagine where I am. I'm floating in a vast network of tunnels, interconnected tunnels that stretch out through the peninsula like a nervous system. And I am a tiny little neuron in that system, and I'm firing away. I'm a little spark, and I'm part of the whole. I lose all sense of ego and find some sort of Zen state of hyper-relaxation. My edges dissolve, and I just am. This removal of self is addictive, and I think it's sort of needed in the modern world. And I know I'm not the only person that cave dives in the pursuit of beauty and dissolution. Everything I do in the caves is somehow related to the overview effect. And there's a lot of cool things that I do about cave diving. In some ways, these all go back to the idea of learning and discovering and improving yourself and going beyond yourself. So, I didn't always view cave diving this way. In fact, until I was 24, I never even considered scuba diving at all, let alone cave diving. So how did I get into this weird lifestyle? And what have I done with it since? I actually started diving somewhere many of you probably know really, really well. Does this look familiar? In 2004, I actually did my open water course here in Key Largo in John Pennekamp State Park. So this is pretty full circle for me. Never in my life had I considered scuba diving, but I was down here on a whim from New York City, and I booked an open water course just randomly when I walked into John Pennekamp State Park. And I loved it, obviously. And after my 4 open water dives, I returned to New York City and I started diving with a dive center in the East Village. That's when I first heard about cave diving. So this shop was called Village Divers, and it was a bunch of hardcore Northeast wreck divers. And they indeed were testosterone-fueled adrenaline junkies. And they would go down to the Florida Springs down here, and they would come back and they would say things like, oh man, like Jenny was like ripping, dude, and I lost my mask and I silted it out. The corner was strong and I almost died. And I thought like, wow, that sounds absolutely terrible. Cave diving is irresponsible and dangerous. I am never going to do this, absolutely not. But as they say never. However, at this point, I did want to somehow combine my chemistry degree with diving, and I found an interesting opportunity in Mexico, a coral chemistry internship. So in 2006, I flew to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. If you don't know where it is, it's just a little bit south of here. And I landed in this idyllic place, which is Akumal, Mexico. And I was there to do this coral reef research internship, which was sort of run by a nonprofit. But when I got there, they told me they'd canceled the internship, super Mexico style. They didn't tell anybody ahead of time. And the reason they'd canceled it was the woman who was running the internship had discovered that the nonprofit was embezzling money, and she had reported them to the local media, so they had, of course, fired her. And so there was nothing to do. But I was already in Mexico. I had a 6-month visa, and I decided I'll do my dive master internship while I regroup. So this ended up being a fateful series of events because I started trading working the desk while everybody was in siesta at this dive shop for as many free ocean dives as I could go on. And because I was selling things at the desk, I had to be able to sell all the products they had. And one of the products they had was guided cenote or guided cavern tours. So at this point, I did not want to go on a guided cavern tour, and they pretty much made me go so I knew what I was selling. And of course, long story short, I liked it. However, at that point, before I got in the water, based on my time at Village Divers, I had a lot of what turned out to be misconceptions about cave diving and cave divers. So let's look at this really quickly. Is cave diving dark? Well, yes, of course it's dark, right? But the entrance to the caves are often filled with beautiful light beams. These photos were taken in the cavern zone, which is basically the entrance to the cave. And anyone with an open water certification can dive in the caverns with a certified guide, and it's something we do at my shop. Even in the caves, we carry really powerful lights so that the caves are not dark to us. So, not so dark, a little dark. Are caves claustrophobic? Are they tight? Do they make you feel claustrophobic? Well, first of all, if you're really claustrophobic, you probably shouldn't be cave diving or in any overhead environment in the first place. Whether it's a cave, whether it's a wreck, under ice, or in a mine, probably not a great idea, right? But not all caves are small. Some are incredibly vast. Both in Mexico and in other parts of the world, there's no need to dive into tight places if a cave diver doesn't want to. And if you're like me and you like wriggling through really tight places, there's plenty of that as well. This is from France. This is a restriction or a tight place to get into the cave at all. And the locals had conveniently provided a rake so that if all the little pebbles filled in the entrance, you could rake it open to get out of the cave. Which, as a photographer, I clearly had to take a whole bunch of photos of this. But some of these places are shockingly enormous. This is another one of our projects from last year. So, they are not all claustrophobic either. Are they dangerous? Cave diving certainly used to be dangerous. A while ago, I know some people that were involved in this process, people had to figure out the safety rules by trial and error, and we learned from them. So these days, there's established protocols and training programs based on those pioneers to reduce the risk of cave diving. The first way we reduce the risks of cave diving is we carry redundant life support and emergency equipment. You may have heard the saying, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. We absolutely take that to heart. So we have at least 2 tanks and 2 regulators, 2 masks, 3 lights, and a ton of other items that are too detailed to get into at the moment. The idea is any diver can solve any gear issue on their own without help from the buddy and get out safely. All this gear, of course, has to be carried in an organized, streamlined, and accessible way so that you don't get entangled in the cave lines or damage the equipment. And we also dive in teams. So this means our buddies can lend us equipment in the cave in the unlikely event of multiple gear failures. Having a good buddy means you also have an extra brain, if you have a good buddy, to help you check your gear at the beginning of the dive and help you solve problems in the cave. Another equally important safety rule is known as the gas management rule of thirds. Simply put, we use a maximum of 1/3 of our total breathing gas to go into the cave, 1/3 to get out, and 1/3 as a reserve. This means that even at the farthest point in the cave divers have at least twice the amount of gas they need to get out. This keeps them safe in the event of a delay and gives them plenty of gas to share with their buddies if they need to. In the caves, we also always have a guideline in place. A guideline is a thin, usually nylon line like the one the diver is deploying here. And guidelines are placed in the cave tunnels, sort of like a pathway, like a route, so you don't get lost on your way out. When we are exploring new caves, we place our own permanent guideline in the cave for future dives and future divers. And in the event that the cave starts to get silty and the visibility starts to get worse, we can follow the guideline out by touch. We train, of course, to avoid silting out the cave in the first place, but we also practice for this worst case scenario. Training to become a cave diver is a lot more rigorous and time-consuming than a lot of people realize, at least if I'm your instructor. From control and kicking techniques to the use of spools and other tools to the implementation of emergency protocols, cave diver training covers all foreseeable issues. A good way to understand the training path is to compare it to levels of education you might find in the US. Don't get mad at me now. All right, this is not to say that open water divers are unskilled, but from a cave diving standpoint, when you start cave diver training, you know absolutely nothing about that particular type of diving, probably like I couldn't identify the most basic fish. From a cave training perspective to us, you are a fresh slate ready to fill with new knowledge. You're an innocent little child. So I would compare preschool to being an open water diver. Elementary school would be something like one of the cave prep courses we do for the gear. So side mount or back mount or mod 1 and a rebreather. This is where you're learning like your grammar, your basic mathematics. Then we would have middle school would be like being a cavern diver because there is a certification for that where you stay in the daylight. Here you get to start applying all this information. You know a little bit, but you still have some pretty strong limits and you're not going out at night on your own. High school would be something like an intro to cave diver. Now your parents let you out a little bit more. You can take the car, but you've got a curfew. We have some limits placed upon us, but you can still go cave diving. And then I would say the bachelor's degree would be something like a full cave diver. A lot of people stop there. You have enough knowledge to go out and get a job. You don't need your parents anymore. And master's degrees would be like the specialties, like stage cave and cave DPV and things like that. I ran out of space on my chart. But I would say you've got your doctorate when you start cave diving professionally. And when you're doing research as a tenured professor, that would be like exploring, pushing the envelopes of records, so forth, or teaching. All this is to say it takes years of dedication and training and practice in technical diving to be good at this. We don't just do a couple days course and then fin off into the caves all willy-nilly. So I don't think it's dangerous anymore if you follow the rules and get good training. Next thought, are all cave divers adrenaline junkies? Well, some of this certainly exists, but I would say most of the cave divers that I train or associate with are not cave diving for cheap thrills. We are cave diving because we like the environment, or we want to do science or photography or exploration or some other project. And even as an explorer, I would say that the moment that I start to feel adrenaline, the moment that my heart rate increases, is the moment that my subconscious has understood that I am beyond my skill or experience level, or that something is going wrong that I haven't noticed yet. So my subconscious is telling me to leave, and I try to listen to it because I really like cave diving and I want to keep doing it for many years to come. So we're not all adrenaline junkies. Are we all big, strong dudes? So the first thing is, there are lots of big, strong dudes, and they can, believe it or not, be really good cave divers. My husband was my cave diving student, and he is actually a big, strong dude. But cave diving is a sport where it's an advantage to be a small woman. First of all, we fit more easily into tight places, and we have way lower air consumption rates. Here's some of my staff last fall. On the way to hike through the jungle, we were going to go work on some exploration sites behind the shop. And you can see what I think of this stereotype. I started calling us Natalie and the Blondes. And all of these ladies worked for me. They were all technical diving instructors. So I'd say this idea of a male-dominated cave community is gone. And believe it or not, they've been very strong women involved in cave diving since the very beginning. So we're not all big, strong dudes. Are we aggressive? Do you need to be aggressive and pushy? I'd say that a lot of cave explorers are aggressive. But again, as a cave diver, I try to be first and foremost safe. Again, I would like to keep cave diving. So this is sort of an odd topic for me because I certainly do things that if you didn't know me, you'd probably consider really aggressive. For example, at this site, we're doing 7 or 8 hour exploration dives before deco, and we're starting like 5 kilometers, 6 kilometers back in the cave. So from my perspective, there's of course always risk, but I try to build my experience carefully. I try to have a very conservative and solid dive plan. I try to put extra safety measures in place on risky dives. So I would say I am methodical and meticulous as opposed to aggressive. I'm tenacious. I'll keep working at something until I master the techniques and I know I can do it safely. And I will always do it. And I tell my students this as well. I never say you can't do that or you should never do that. The idea is to figure out how. How are we going to do this in, well, the safest way possible? So we're not all crazy aggressive either. So now that that is out of the way, let's take a look at some of the really cool aspects of cave diving. All right, number 1, geology. There is a lot of geology. Flooded caves, of course, are beautiful. And one of the most particularly beautiful aspects where I live are the speleothems, which are stalactites, stalagmites, the dripstone formations. These are typical of the caves in Mexico. They're in Indonesia, the Bahamas, Bon Air, among some other cave diving locations. And the speleothems look very different depending upon the cave that you happen to be in. While the growth rate of the formations is variable dependent upon rainfall and other factors, I have heard general estimates that formations grow 10 to 15 centimeters every 100 years. So you can imagine how old this blob is. That's a lot of time growing. And the way these cave formations grow is, of course, interesting. And they tell us about the unique geological history of the caves. These formations can only form in air-filled passageways. So anytime you see a cave that is flooded, it was at some point not flooded, or at least had a partial airspace if it has formations in it. The way this works is that rainwater dissolves limestone, trickles through the natural cracks and fissures in the ceiling, moves through the porous rock, and then starts to drip. And as carbon dioxide releases from the dripping water, calcium carbonate from the limestone gets deposited onto those formations very, very slowly. In regions like Florida here, where the caves weren't dry, there's no speleothems at all. Interestingly, the above water space can be filled with gases other than air, so it's not always safe to breathe them. If a cave has high concentrations of carbon dioxide, for example, the CO2 in the water in the dripping formations won't off-gas, and so you won't get any formations forming. They won't grow. I know, I thought it was drying when I first started cave diving too. So basically, all the caves you see in my images with speleothems like this were at some point above the water table. And when you think about timing, the last time many of these caves were dry was at the end of the last glacial period, which was 10 to 12,000 years ago. Many of the caves were probably dry multiple times. Potentially they flooded and dried out in cycles, right, as the sea level rose and fell with glacial periods. And many of the caves we dive in Mexico, you actually go into a dry cave to get to the water. So the minimum age of any photo I have that has formations in it, well, the formations, not the photo, is 10 to 12,000 years ago. Cave diving in Mexico for me is like diving in a place that's been frozen in time at the end of the last glacial period. And there are caves without speleothems can be equally as beautiful. This is in France. These caves here were never dry and air-filled long enough for formations to grow. The scalloping along the walls in the French caves dictates that mechanical action was responsible for the formations of the caves. So these were more erosion. This type of cave is common here in Florida and in France, among other locations. The color looks really weird. These types of caves tend to have fewer branching tunnels. They're more like tubes. And in France, where this photo is taken, you actually have to get out of the water and hike through a dry cave and get back in. So they go up and down like this, which is also really fun. So, yes, some of them you can't breathe the air, so you have to breathe from your tank while you drag it through. So to give you an idea of different geologies, just to have an idea, French caves tend to be kind of a single tube with not very many branching tunnels. And Mexican caves and Indonesian caves, to name a few examples, have a lot of branching tunnels, and they're really complex. And there's a reason for this. It's because Mexican caves form through the process of dissolution. And how this works is really interesting. So in this photo, you can see what we call the halocline. That's the interface of fresh and salt water. And so it forms a line of layers. It looks like a thermocline, but it's way stronger. And this diver is floating above the salt water. It looks like you're above like an underwater lake. It's very, very cool. So at the halocline, you get more cave formation. One of my mentors called it a chemical knife. The fresh water is saturated with limestone. It's dissolved as much as it can. The salt water is saturated with limestone. It's dissolved as much as it can. But when you mix two solutions in saturation, if you're a chemistry geek, you get higher dissolution potential. So this is the main driving factor of all the cave formation in the Riviera Maya where I live. And the halocline, you can see to the bottom of this video, has been at different levels throughout geological time based on sea level. So what we have is multi-level layered caves with different tunnels that were formed in different geological cycles of glacial periods and melts. And Bonaire, as another example, has very, very short, non-extensive caves. And that's because there's almost no water in Bonaire. There's no water for erosion, and there's no water for the halocline because it's a desert island. For Mexico, what this means is we have the longest flooded cave systems in the planet that we know of so far. The caves have been forming through this process of dissolution for over 2 million years, and now you know why I live in Mexico, right? Even the rock itself is interesting if you look closely. The limestone bedrock of the Yucatan Peninsula formed underwater, and when it was part of the seabed, 200 million years ago. So marine sediments, coral skeletons, and marine organism microskeletons all layered to make this really thick limestone platform. So while from a distance, this looks like just plain crinkly limestone, it's actually studded with all sorts of coral fossils. You probably have something sort of similar here in Florida. One of my friends was the first person that tried to study the coral fossils in the caves, and she thinks we might be able to learn about past climates and ocean conditions by checking out the coral in the well-preserved fossils. And we can even find conch shells and sea urchin fossils. They're remains of animals that lived in like an unimaginably distant time. I was recently in Indonesia, and there they had giant clam fossils, which was amazing, but I didn't have my camera with me. I really regret that. Paleontology, another aspect of cave diving. So marine fossils are not the only fossils we have found. This is a turtle skull in one of our exploration projects, and we also found pieces of, I think they're called scuts, the shell pieces. And how this happens is that the cool, dark, static environment of the fresh water of the caves actually preserves the fossils and the bones really well. A lot of the area where we are, it's got such a hot, humid jungle that everything above ground degrades, right? So until we started diving in the caves and finding these things like mastodons and cave bears and other creatures, nothing had ever been found in the region, and scientists didn't have anything to study. So these creatures either crawled back into the dry caves and perished inside, or their bodies were washed back into the caves, and the caves were partially flooded. These bones here are in that same exploration site, and they're calcified. So calcium carbonate like dripped over and fused them into the ground. So this was when they were dry. And these are the remains of a giant ground sloth that we found kilometers from the surface at one of our projects behind Muyil. And that pelvis is larger than me. It's cool. Couldn't believe it. A team of divers, that's not me, I wish it was, discovered a huge amount of bones in a site called Hoyo Negro, which has been featured in National Geographic. Human remains from a woman named Naya, that's the skull, are thought to provide a missing link in the understanding of ancient people's movement through the Americas. This is a really valuable find. Archaeology, another thing, similar, not quite the same. So the ancient Maya believed that the gods lived down in the cenotes and that the cenotes were sacred passageways to the underworld. So they would toss sacrifices in the forms of like pottery, sometimes jewelry and things like that into the cenotes for the gods. This pot here is called a bacia matada, which is a killed pot. And so what they would do is they'd punch a hole in the pot and then toss it in, because that would ensure that it wouldn't float on the surface and it would sink down to be with the gods. This is pottery that was found by actually a former student of mine, Ariel, in Belize. So they also were tossing pots into cenotes. And this is a site at Cenote Chanhol. So again, some pots and some bones. Those are placed out of the way up on the shelf, though, by cave divers, because there's a kind of tight entrance and they didn't want people landing on them when they came in. Biology, another interesting aspect. So there's certainly a huge amount we don't know about the strange and endemic life that lives in the caves. Each area of the world will have its own sort of endemic cave fish and creatures. And I've been lucky enough to assist some biologists when I have a day off in Mexico's caves. So this is my friend, Dr. Fernando Calderon Gutierrez, and he is trying to catch a shrimp. It's really, really hard. I don't know, he's so good at it. I don't know how he does this. And here he is with this net. You're all divers, you can imagine. So what he does is he gets like this net and he just swims through the water like this for, let's say, 200 meters, some predefined distance, and then he takes it back and gets all the microfauna out of the net. This, of course, is our friend, the cave blindfish. This is the blindfish that we have in Mexico. There are other areas that have things like blind catfish, I believe in Texas, and different species around the world. This is a remipede. It's like an underwater millipede. It lives in the salt water underneath the halocline. It swims by wiggling all of its little fins or feet. And I don't like them on land, but somehow underwater, they're like really cool and not scary. This is a tiny shrimp. There is a lot of different tiny crustaceans in the cave. Some of them are not visible to the naked eye. I can't identify them all because I'm not a biologist. You guys would probably be good at this. This is called an isopod. It's basically a cave roly-poly or a pillbug or salad, and it like crawls along the ground and kind of like flips through the water like this, and then they do the same thing. If you get close to them, they curl into little balls, just like they do on land. If you're in caves that are very close to the ocean, where there's communication with the salt water, you can see some things that have adapted to live in the cave or are just happy living there. So these are scallops. There's some weird sponges. And these are anemones. That's a starfish. Brittle stars in the cave. It's pretty cool. Now we can talk a little bit about my favorite part, which is exploration, because that's the whole point. So at this point, the quality is probably going to go down a little bit because these are all GoPro screenshots from real exploration projects. Not this photo. This one I actually took with a normal camera, but the rest are not that good. So half of the reason my business and exploration partner, Vince, and I started our business was to create a base for exploration and science, and we've been pretty good so far. As far as the exploration goes, we've done, actually, I counted recently, it's over 100 kilometers of mapped cave at this point. We've discovered about 200 cave systems. We've been doing it for a while. It's been 20 years. not as impressive as it sounds. Exploration requires a huge amount of time and money and effort, but of course, it's incredibly rewarding. The first thing people usually ask me is, how do you find new caves to explore? So some people just walk out in the jungle looking for cenotes, but unless you have the landowner's permission, this is illegal and rude. There are no public bits of land in Mexico. So the most efficient way we have found to find cenotes is just to go around and ask landowners to show us their cenotes. So sometimes they think we're really weird and they don't want anything to do with us, and sometimes they're actually interested. This is me and Vince with Jesus, who owns a cenote that in Spanish is called Chicken Ranch for obvious reasons. And this is our team with the owner of our very first exploration project, which is called Tatich, and we look like children. So even when you find somebody who has a cenote and they're interested in showing it to you, you still usually have a long hike in the jungle to reach the place, and you have no idea if they will be going cave or not. We often hire porters if the walk is very long. Of course, that costs money, but it's well worth it, because if you know, it's not a good idea to go do like a 5-hour dive and then lift heavy things. Even once we get to the water, I would say that maybe 1 out of every 20 pools of water we find has diveable cave. So this place had lots of water. It was a very nice sinkhole. There was no cave, no horizontal passageways. We found our first going cave in 2010 at a cenote called Tatich. And we went on to explore caves all up and down the Riviera Maya. Some were super beautiful, like this place, which we named Buquin. Things got really interesting. We started going to the center of the Yucatan Peninsula. We were invited to work in some towns there, and there they have sinkholes that are very deep. They go down to like 60, 70, 100 meters, so really deep. And I even dove into this place, which was one of the least intelligent things I've done, which is like Boyle on the north coast. And it was filled with branches from inland, and we had to cut them out with a saw before I could go in. So it had some pretty extreme flow conditions. But by far the strangest caves we've explored, the most dangerous and the most rewarding, are some microbial caves we've been finding near the southern border with the state. So in 2015, I can't believe it's been that long, we took a boat to a hole in a mangrove forest, and we dropped into this spooky green entrance. And there was some tarp in there, but I didn't get them on photo, so sorry. We found ourselves in a cave that is filled with the long brown formations you see here. And when I swam to a solid-looking rock to go tie off my cave line, it just sort of disappeared in a poof. And then the ceiling kind of jiggled and slid off and got absorbed into the floor. So it turned out we were diving in a place that was basically covered in goo. It was one vast microbial colony, and it's really cool looking. I named the cave Pandora because the movie Avatar had come out, and it was Strange Life. And it's super challenging. Every breath you exhale causes stuff to rain down, and it drops the visibility to 0. So we soon reached some kilometers of cave. I don't remember how much this map is, but so you start so there's that star right there, that's where we're starting, and these little lines are cave tunnels and like a survey. And we were about 7 or 8 kilometers to those yellow dots. So we were basically reaching the end of what we could do with the tech that we had. We needed another entrance, and we found this place, which is actually an old pumping station inland. It's a lot better than renting boats, and so we started from diving there. So once we started charting these with GPS points, it actually looked like they could connect, and there was still, that's probably like 4 maybe kilometers between them. And there's some similarities between the place, so we thought we were probably onto something. And then in 2018, we connected these 2 places into one massive cave system. So this now, from spot to spot, is 12 kilometers, and we've kept going back. So as of February 2025, this is over 20 kilometers of mapped cave system, and we're still going. It's getting serious. So the fact that this exists means, of course, there's probably a lot of other caves in the area. And so we started looking all up and down the coast in this area. And over the last few years, we've continued to work and find more caves. This is a place called Dagoba. More microbial growth. It looks a little bit different. More goo. More goo. I like goo. Yeah, you have to kind of mush around. Yeah. One of my friends tried to tie off onto a conch shell because it was covered in goo and then it just moved. This is a place called Vulcan. It's a horrible little tiny cave. I was really glad I didn't go. It's just like a green muck hole. We found a place I named Antares, a little bit to the north of Dagoba. Again, a little bit of hydrogen sulfide in the water, microbial life. Really cool looking. This is in a lagoon in the same area. And there's two entrances on each side of the lagoon. So this is one we named Juno. And it has this spooky red color from the mangrove tannins. There was crazy reversing flow conditions, and we found a wheelbarrow 500 feet back in the cave. Yeah, it got sucked in by the flow. And this is Ursus, which is on the other side of the lagoon. It has similar reversing flow conditions, but it's a little bit bigger. It's undivable most of the year. This was a lucky clear day. And finally, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we found another cave west of Pandora, which was exciting. And it had a really crazy restricted entrance, which I named Medusa. This was really exciting for me because I was working off of a theory of cave distribution based on like fracture patterns in the area. I was going around and looking, and so I found this cave based on that. So that was one of the proudest moments as I used science. And it was challenging. The entrance was so bad that even like the previous year, I don't think I could have done it. But now we've checked hundreds of possibilities in the area, and we know we're on to something. So these 8 caves that we've worked in over the last 10 years point to an existence of a huge, unexpected and unexplored cave system in an area over 150 kilometer sort of swath where nobody suspected any caves to exist before. So I think this is going to be me and Vince's legacy as explorers. It's a massive, dirty, disgusting, hostile cave system that nobody's ever going to want to dive, but I like it. So the next thing I can talk about just real briefly is science. So as a trained chemist, I've always been interested in the science of Mexico's flooded caves. We've been involved in all sorts of things, but one of the main opportunities that we offer our graduates is participation in this Science Week. Yeah? This is Dr. Patricia Bettis. She's a renowned hydrogeologist at Northwestern University, and she's been studying the caves in Mexico for over 20 years. She did her PhD down there based on the halocline and flow. So we've worked to create this annual or sometimes biannual Science Week, which is a nonprofit week where we work with former students and local scientists and Dr. Beddoes to do science. This is one of my former students coming out of a cave with water samples. You can tell we're really cool people. We've been training people to assemble the data loggers that Dr. Beddoes invented, and we install them in the caves. Here she is with her newest invention, which is a point flow sensor. So this was our project last year, I think, which was pretty wild. So what this thing does is you can just hold it in the cave, and it will tell you how many cubic meters per minute are going, or per second, are going through the little tube. So how did we use this? If you guys are familiar with discharge calibrations in a river, we tried to do this. So this involved bringing a whole bunch of poles and weights and floats into the cave, and we built a grid, a temporary grid. And this allowed us to basically take this unit and take measurements over and over again repeatedly over this grid for an entire tidal cycle. And then we could extrapolate what's happening in the cave based on some other like tilt meters that we had in the cave. And it's fascinating. So it was an experiment and it worked. And it's a protocol we're going to continue to use in the future. It's the first time anybody's done anything like this because you can do it in a river, but in a cave it's a different game. And this project, of course, took us to some pretty cool places. This is one of my friends, Lexi, diving in a tunnel that's just filled with sponges. And this is us exiting. If you guys know Mexico at all, they have this company called Xcaret, which is like Disneyland of Mexico. And so this is in one of their parks that usually can't get access to, but you can use your involvement in science to dive in cool caves. Conservation, all right, a really important topic to me. The Yucatan Peninsula, like many karst environments, is entirely porous limestone. So all the water that we have from the rain seeps down into the underground aquifer, and we have no above-ground lakes or rivers at all in the area. The only access to fresh water is underground, and that means it's extremely important to understand water flow and to conserve the aquifer's quality. A large portion of the population still relies on wells. Most of our water is well water, and it's not clean, it just comes straight out of the ground. Also, the trees and the rest of the jungle rely on this water. So when you're diving, you can see tree roots thrusting down into the caves and drinking from the water. It's beautiful. From there, the water flows out onto the into the mangrove forests and onto the reef. So this is called the caleta, and that's that little bright green area on the screen that you can see, and that's all the water's coming out from the caves onto the reef. So the ocean and the caves and everything, it's a system, it's connected. And any pollution in the caves will damage the estuaries and the reefs. Unfortunately, recently we had a spike of tourism between 2018 and 2024. It's kind of dying down now, which I'm a little happy about. But it led to really poor building practices. In some areas, the jungle's been clear-cut, and divers discovered untreated sewage getting injected directly under the center of Tulum. Thankfully, this has not spread to other caves, but this is bad. And places like this cave that you already saw in my photos, Sakpapam, they no longer exist. The owner dynamited the entire cave to create an accessible surface river in some sort of misinformed hope that people would like ride around in tubes like a lazy river, or that he could build condos around it. That place, gone. That place, gone. And most recently, giant holes and columns were drilled through the limestone into the caves for this misimagined project of a tourist train, which is fully inaccessible to tourists. So far, it's been a commercial and logistical disaster. And if you don't believe me, you can ask Google AI. The government was claiming that no caves were damaged in the creation of this train, actually until about 2 weeks ago, where they finally admitted it. But I have proof. So I have photos that show differently. This is Vince looking down one of the boreholes in one of our exploration projects. It's a little dangerous in Mexico to call the government a liar, but I did post all of these on social media being like, oh, look at these beautiful train holes I found. Isn't this a pretty exercise in photography? And just left them there, and then a bunch of the media actually stole them off my Facebook, which was my original intent. And so they made the news, and I got death threats. Right, so here he is again, looking down the hole. This is actually Vince looking up a hole. This is really funny because the construction workers upstairs saw us and started freaking out. They did not know what was going on down in the cave. And this is a construction barrier that got dumped down from one of the boreholes to land in our exploration project. It looks like a tombstone, and I think that is fitting. And more recently, I have some more images of the completed train columns at another site. The metal casings used to pour the columns are already rusting, and all that heavy metal is getting into the aquifer. I learned my lesson, and I did not submit these photos or put them on Facebook, so these are not public. I have been submitting them to things like photo contests in Mexico, but under a pseudonym. So I'm never going to put this online or on my social media because I don't want people to reverse image search it back to me. And that all leads to why I feel so fortunate to be able to take photos and videos in the caves. All these photos and videos are important to show people what lies underneath their feet. Not only to document the damage, but to awe people with the great beauty of the caves, and hopefully inspire better conservation practices in the future. And of course, I get to share them all with you. That's it. Thank you for listening to my talk. So these are my social media channels. I have all my photos and videos on those, if anybody's interested. Except those. Well, that one's public. The train photos are not going on.
Do you take all your cables home with you after a dive, or do they stay?
The line stays in the cave. Yeah. You put it there and then you use it as a map and then you follow it the next time and you add more.
Thank you, Nat. We've got a couple minutes for questions, and then we'll let everybody go. But Matt will be here all day tomorrow, so you can catch up and ask questions. But if anybody has a couple that they want to ask.
Hi, thank you. That was super.
Thanks.
What happens to the exhaled air?
Okay,
from
that's a
divers?
good question. It depends upon the porosity of the ceiling. So you can have really non-porous limestone or you can have very porous limestone, and that's a lot about the sedimentation that happens. So sometimes you'll get a bubble that will stay there for like a long time and then slowly filter up, or sometimes the bubbles just filter up through the limestone back up to the surface pretty quickly.
Did Indians actually dive and leave stuff in there?
Sorry?
A kind of a two-part question.
Go for it.
I know you're not doing this alone. You have at least one other person in the cave with you.
Sometimes.
Oh, okay. But I'm just wondering how large your teams may get, especially with you've got other people that are helping you pack in, pack out, and then the second part is, do you have any crossover with Jill Heinrich, who's done a lot of cave?
I know Jill. She's amazing. She's a big inspiration. She actually used our shop as support when she did the movie. I didn't get to be on the shoot because somebody had to run the business, but my business partner and one of my employees did it. So she's amazing. I haven't gone exploring with her or anything. I wish I could have. But yeah, the teams, honestly, in the water, I don't want to be in a big team. It's already very complicated with 2 people. So I'd say usually when we're exploring, it's either me and Vince, who's my exploration buddy, or me. It would just be me or just him if it's going to be very, very tight. You don't want to go into something tight and have somebody behind you and then have to back out. So if it's something like that, we'll very often just solo that one little part and then come out and rejoin. When you're exploring with somebody, it doesn't work to have somebody you don't know really well and you don't jive with. So Vince is basically my brother at this point, and we came out of exploration dives for the first probably 10 years we worked together, just enraged, screaming at each other, why did you do that, blah, 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 blah. But the process of it has been such now that we read each other's minds underwater. So I don't go exploring with my husband. He's got his own projects and his own team.
But Jill's, the mapping, those don't cross with her mapping.
She's an explorer and she's done a ton of stuff, but I've never done anything with her. Yeah, but she's an inspiration. She's an incredible human being.
In your archaeology area, you found pottery and things there. Did you find ancient peoples in those caves?
Human remains. Yeah. There's been a couple of human remains found in our area. Most of those remains in my particular area where I live, which is just along the coast, those are really old and appear to be burials. So people would walk down their elders that they really respected and put them with burial regalia in there. And that's the sites that have been found in our area. Now, when you go into the center of the peninsula, which is very close in the modern world, but not so close in the ancient world, the culture was slightly different. So it wasn't like Maya. They had the Itze that lived in Chichen Itza. And those people were actually tossing people into the cenotes sometimes as sacrifices. So the current understanding is like if there was no rain or something like that, then they would do a sacrifice into the cenote of a person. And actually, the other current understanding is if the person survived the night, then they were considered like blessed and they took them out. But that's just what a guide at Chichen Itza told me, so I don't know if he was just trying to make me feel better.
So I had a question. Your pictures are Mexico, France, Bonaire, and you were talking Indonesia. Are any of your cave dives in Indonesia?
I did. I was there for a month last year on an exploration project with a group run through a company called Nixie Expeditions. That I'd worked with some of the people on it before, so they invited me. But there, my function was not to take photos. My function was to like try to push the ends of the line and coordinate the dive teams. So I did not bring my camera. I will never do that again. Not a possibility. I had so much stuff. I was like, I don't want to bring a rebreather and a camera, but that was the wrong decision. Yeah.
You might have mentioned it early on, but I'm thinking about you submerged in that water that's made up of different things. Do you ever find it's really toxic to your skin or have any reactions to it?
There is some areas that have hydrogen sulfide. So that's a toxic gas dissolved in water. It comes from the breakdown of organic matter by anaerobic bacteria. So it usually starts in the salt water. So like leaves, things like that. So if you have a sinkhole without a lot of water flow, that's a really common place where you would find that. And so the little microbes, they're releasing it. And the hydrogen sulfide is less dense than salt water and more dense than fresh water. So it'll slowly move up and layer at the halocline level where those two different densities are, and you get like this cloud that looks really cool. It's not always that bad. It can be okay, and like you just go through it. But we have had a couple situations. One was in those sinkholes I was saying in Yucatan. We got down to like, hey, maybe there's a tube right there. And so Vince had the reel, he went first, and it was like neon yellow. And he went into it and he came right back out and he said it was wildly burning his skin. And then at the microbial cave, there is a lot of hydrogen sulfide in the water. When we were originally exploring it, we were in wetsuits. And we were like coming out of 2 or 3 days straight, like smelling like rotten eggs. Like you're wandering around and people are like, you kind of need to shower. And you're like, I did shower. And so some of that can be really bad. And we don't have any science on it. But if you talk to anybody who does this, like spends a lot of time in hydrogen sulfide, which is probably like 10 of us, right? We all think it is complicating off-gassing and decompression in some way.
But so far, no long-term effects with your skin or health?
No, but some people are allergic to it and then they'll get itchy, so they wouldn't go in that.
Just one more question.
Yeah.
Well, with all your beautiful photos here, they're lit up so beautifully. When you go in there, do you just carry a simple white light? And does it light up in those different colors because of what the composite is?
The colors are real. I shoot in RAW, so they come out pretty dark, and then I edit them to reflect the colors that the particular place looks like, at least based on my memory. I have dived with up to 9 lights that I place around the cave. Oh. And some of my lights are extremely expensive and thankfully somewhat sponsored. Because I would never be able to afford them on my own. They're like $8,000 for one light.
Right, because you want the whole place lit up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was wondering about that. Thank you.
Who are we going?
Kind of another
There she is.
microbial question. Do you get like ever within, I don't know, with the low oxygen environments, but do you ever get the same dinoflagellates that interact with the cyanobacteria that kind of release the neurotoxins and
as far as I know, we don't have dinoflagellates in the H2S water. The rest of the fresh water is like fine. So I guess my answer is no, but I have not done like microbial studies of any sort, and I'm not a biologist, so I can't state that. But like people drink the water and we all shower and stuff, and there's no problem. So I would say no.
When you start exploring a new cave system, and you know how long it's going to take you with the tanks, and you know when your air is ready to stop, you have to get back.
Yes.
Now, when you want to keep exploring deeper or farther, and there is an opening in the area, how do you do that? How do you go?
Take more tanks.
Huh?
We take more tanks.
Yeah, you take, but there are so many tanks that you can take.
Yeah, so there's a couple different tools you can use. The most I'm really happy as far as like aluminum 80s taking is 5 and then 102. And with that, we're writing DPVs. So we use scooters that are really powerful. They go like 200, 250 feet a minute. So you like swim the first round, survey it out, make your map, go back, scooter that real fast, drop everything, do the next part. And there will be a point at which you're not happy carrying any more tanks. So at that point, you've got a few options. We do have rebreathers, so now we're using rebreathers a lot, which is great. But either rebreathers or open circuit tanks, you can start doing setup dives. So you start taking tanks in and leaving them there, going out. So maybe you go with like 5 tanks, and you use 3 of them to take 2 of them, like maximum distance they would be able to get you out. And then when you go for it and you do your dive, if anything happens, you can just pick up that tank and use it to get out. So with rebreathers now that the technology is getting good enough that we have like really good side mount rebreathers that can go into tight places now, like we'll go to a site and do like a setup dive. So one time we set up like a station with 2 tanks there, and then went in farther, 2 more tanks, and then we just spent the whole week zooming in and out with just 3 tanks on our body on the scooters. And then we knew we had those bailout tanks if we needed. And then Vince's rebreather broke, and I got to go back by myself and take all the tanks out in one truly miserable dive.
Do you have a rope system by now with all you have been going through? Do you have a permanent rope system?
All the line that we leave in there, we don't take out. So all of it. So you basically run your line, you cut it when you're done, and those little those little lines, that's a map we made of the line, really simple vector map. So you take like the direction, the distance, the depth, and you just do that over and over, and that line's permanent. And then at the next dive, you go in, you attach to the end, and you keep going. So when you do it, that's like the line for the cave. Yeah.
Can anybody go diving in these sites, or they're close to just?
Some of our exploration sites have been opened and some have not. It's really tricky, right? Because cave divers can be like, they hear about a site, they want to go. And so there's been a lot of situations where people just go and they don't bother to find out who the landowner is or contact the explorers to get access. Like I'm usually pretty open and will put people in contact with the landowners and things if they want to dive it. But like we don't publicly publish our GPS sites anymore because then you had people like walking through the jungle like 2 big Germans. It's like somebody's like little palapa where they live is just right there. They're like getting naked in the jungle, 6'5", pasty white men. The poor little Maya guy and his wife are like, what is this? It's just like people coming onto your land for no reason, right? And then if they die, like you actually have some weird liability in Mexico, like the government's going to come and make sure like you paid your land taxes and blah, 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 right? So then the government is inspecting your area and that's bad. So it's a kind of thing where the landowners need to know the risk that they are incurring by allowing divers to go and like give permission. So not everything gets open publicly.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Those concrete poles that you show, are those for condominium or it was the train?
It's the train. Those are train poles. And
That's
so
horrible.
it's insane. There's like so many pylons. There's thousands, tens of thousands that they did in like 2 years. And they did it like because the former president, it was like his project and he wanted to finish it before he was out of office. They like just put him in. They said, we don't care about archaeological sites. We're not doing any environmental impact studies, nothing. So a lot of engineers are saying the whole thing's just going to collapse. I mean, we'll see. But they did it. They got it done. It's done. It's running. I mean, the train is running. People are not using the train. They tried to sell it to the public as like a public transport, but when they tried to put on the highway, which would have made sense because damage has already happened there, the hotels didn't want to give up their highway space. So they moved it 8 kilometers back in the jungle. So to get to the train that's supposed to be public transport, you need like a bicycle or a taxi or something just to get there and get back to the highway. So it's not useful. I think it's going to turn into a freight train.
All right, to